God's will is simple. The most wretched man in hell will not be Adolf Hitler. The most wretched man in hell, or woman, will not be one like Joe Stalin or some of these more modern devils. The most wretched person in hell will be a former Seventh-day Adventist.
Where am I? Where am I? Where am I? Here I am. Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. It's good to have you here joining me today as we continue to discuss all things Adventist. I am a former Adventist and I'm looking in from the outside, revealing Adventism one conversation at a time. And I've been dealing with a topic in recent times where I'm identifying something that we all know is there, that there's kind of two Adventisms in one, two movements within the one. I often bring up my screen, and some of you may have seen the new version of it. We have, of course, there's different groups. There's the leadership at the top. We've got our trad ads, which are, your historicist Adventists. Ellen White's the prophet. CB's Concerned Brethren. Dennis Priebe. These are the original Adventists. And then we've got the prog ads, and these guys are the ones that don't like to be categorized. They like to say that Ellen White's devotional. They're Big Tent Adventists. That's not my Adventism. Whenever I call out the Ted Wilson, Dennis Priebe style Adventism, there's nothing to see here. And then, of course, we've got our cultural Adventists in the middle, who are all about haystacks and praise and worship and just having a wonderful Sabbath, really, and enjoying the community and camaraderie that is definitely there within the Adventist Church. I'd like to suggest that those Adventists who say to me, that's not my Adventism, when I point out that Adventism actually, at its very core, is last-gen theology. Well, that's what Pearson says. That's what Neil Wilson says. That's what Ted Wilson says. That's what pretty much all the leaders from Ellen White to the present day have said. And when people say, look, that's not my Adventism, I just want to highlight to you guys that say that to me, well, what is the reform that you're making? And why have you called Des Ford your Martin Luther? Why are you writing books like Reclaiming the Prophet? Why is legalism so entrenched within the Adventist Church? Why are gospel Adventists, progressive Adventists, liberal Adventists, Big Tent Adventists, that's not my Adventism, Adventists? What is it that you're trying to reform if you don't think that you have something unique and different to rally against? Well, back in my day, we knew clearly that there were Fordites and CBs, the Concerned Brethren. And I wish we, way simpler times back then. We could categorize and label quite easily, and everyone embraced it. So today we're looking at an article by Robert H. Pearson, he was the president of the Adventist Church. I'll unpack that a little bit more in a moment. And he wrote this article in the Review and Herald, December 13, 1973. And the landscape at that time, questions on doctrine had come out in 57, and it was now creating a bit of an impact. M.L. Andreasen and his tribe of real Adventists were very upset with that book. Adventism was now being portrayed to the general public in that book that, hey, we just love the Sabbath. We're the same as you guys. There's nothing to see here. We're not a cult. And that created a lot of interesting conversation within the church and began the polarity, the pluralistic movements, the two churches in one that we see today began then. And of course, in the early 60s, Raymond Cottrell, I think, was one of the main igniters of the new theology. And he worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring about change. Figure did, the president around that time also. And a number of people were hoping to see Adventism really head into more biblical, gospel-based waters. And so Raymond Cottrell, I'm going to do a whole show on this in next week, I hope, where he approached Figure, the president at the time, and he said, look, we need to be able to prove our distinct doctrine of the investigative judgment and the sanctuary by the Bible alone. Ellen White calls us to do this. And Figure said, sure, go for it, mate. You're easily going to be able to do that, I'm sure, aren't you? And so Raymond Cottrell wrote to about 36 scholars, academics, pastors, teachers, people in the know, and they studied this topic. Let us prove the sanctuary doctrine with the Bible alone. Well, after 5 years, they couldn't do it. And so that secret Daniel committee just kind of disappeared. But I think that was around 1965. So we come to the end of the 60s. Des Ford, Raymond Cottrell, a number of players are bringing in an assurance of salvation, focusing on the gospel, putting Jesus first. This is a good movement. This is the movement that I was birthed into. And I am very appreciative of the gospel progressive Reformation Adventists. Please don't get me wrong, guys. I'm very appreciative of what you have done, what you are doing, putting out books like this. You know, you're stirring the pot. You're putting Ellen into perspective. I love what you're doing. It's great. But you need to realize it is a new theology. It is new wine, and it does not fit into the old wine caskets. So we come into the 70s. Pearson, who is very much a traditional Adventist, a proponent of last generation theology. You will see that as I read to you some more information about that today. He is on a mission to reclaim his Adventism, true Adventism, which actually is the birthright. Let's face it, it's the birthright of traditional Adventists. Let's not fool ourselves here and pretend that the core doctrine of Adventism goes back to 1844. Ellen G. White confirmed all of these teachings and pillars. It is marinated in legalism, and there's no denying it. That these guys like Pearson, they were worried. M.L. Andreasen, they were worried. You guys, the new theology guys, you don't label me Adventists, progressive, reformative, gospel, liberal Adventists, whatever you want to call yourself, Fordites, followers of a more biblical Adventism. Good on you, I love it. You're fooling yourself to think that you actually lay claim to that. You kind of grew out of it, but you're not. It's not your birthright. The church split and you didn't even know it. Anyway, along comes the 70s. We've got the new theology, and we have this amazing amount of music coming onto the scene. We've got people over here in Australia like Bob Wolfgram, Lowell Tarling, Genelevich, Sally Hilda, putting out gospel music albums within the Adventist church. Go and watch my interview that I did with Paul Johnson the other day. Amazing. You'll learn all about the incredible creativity that was exploding into Adventism. So we had new theology, Ford, Cottrell, all of this new great stuff coming in, a Bible focus. And along comes, I'm setting the scene for today's show, along comes Pearson, back into power, figures gone, and Pearson, from I think 66 to 78, maybe even quite a long period of time, is the president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this article that I'm about to read to you guys very soon, this article is 1973, and it is him laying the battle line. Guys, you are heading in the wrong direction. It's time to get back on track to real Adventism and last generation theology, which is that is the Adventist message. Come on, progressives. Why are you so shocked when you hear people preaching this from the pulpit today? Anyway, so we're going to read that in a few minutes, but I do want to give you some background. It's a fascinating article, so stick around. But I have prepared earlier. I'm trying lately to sometimes things that I want to get off my chest to not just kind of have a stream of consciousness conversation, though I do enjoy that. Every now and again, I like to let's do what Ellen White did, and I use Marion Davis and Fanny Bolton, Chat GPT, to I throw out all my ideas and thoughts, and it helps to put it into my words. I've been building up a relationship with Marion Davis and Fanny Bolton, and and they put it into my words very well. So here are my thoughts in writing, scripted. It'll take 5 minutes to read it, but it sets the scene, and then I'm going to read the article to you, which will further introduce my theory that the Adventist Church has been having a civil war. In fact, I've just finished writing a book about that. I'm proud to say the draft copy is done, 18 chapters, and of course I used Fanny Bolton and Marion Davis to help me, and used over 580 transcripts as background to create all my ideas into this book, which I'm hoping will come out in the next month or two. I need to ask Gillian Ford to help me put it out there. Anyway, that's an aside issue, but I think you will really enjoy the book. Anyway, here we go. So today we will pull back the curtain of Adventist history, theology, and politics. I just want to check chat to make sure I am live, that we are here. Yes, we are. Good. Okay. And please add your comments, as always, in the chat. Where was I? Yes, we're pulling back the curtain on Adventist history, theology, and politics. Today, we are tackling the massive two-part theory that hits the very core of the Seventh-day Adventist denominational identity. Many liberal and progressive Adventists argue that last generation theology, LGT, was just a localized, short-lived fringe movement that died out decades ago. Today, we are going to completely dismantle that myth. My two theories for this show are simple. Robert H. Pearson was an overt, intentional proponent of last generation theology. This theology didn't peak or die in 1978. It dropped its conventional label, went underground, and remains the dominant, operational, mainstream message of the Seventh-day Adventist Church today. Let's dive into the history, the hidden political conspiracies, and the current state of the global SDA Church leadership to see how deep this rabbit hole really goes. So in the first segment, that I'm just sharing right now. And we're looking at the Pearson administration and the ultimate theological setup. To understand where we are today, we have to look back at the late 1960s and 1970s. Robert H. Pearson served as General Conference President from 1966 to 1979. He wasn't just a passive bystander during the rise of modern LGT, he was its chief administrative protector. Now, by the way, a lot of people say to me, why are you trying to look at these two sides? What's the point of doing that? If you're a former Adventist, why not just criticize the whole bit? Well, my suggestion is, if you are going to help Adventists understand that overall, big picture, they have an incorrect theology when compared to the Bible's theological claims, you need to identify that if you are speaking into that movement, that you are speaking to two separate theologies. You can't just lump it into one big basket of, oh, they're Adventists, we're going to dismantle, because you'll be able to have good head-to-head conversations with the traditional Adventists, but with the progressives you won't, because they are honey trappers. They are the Trojan horse. They have snuck in and infiltrated all the leadership levels high up, academically, some of the universities. And what they're trying to do, they're not even too sure of themselves anymore, because they've lost their way. But you do need to identify the two theologies. Anyway, back to my script. Pearson watched the changing culture of the 1960s and feared that creeping liberalism and an evangelical new theology were invading Adventist universities. To fight this, he heavily backed Kenneth H. Wood, the editor of the Review and Herald, and associate editor Herbert Douglas. Douglas was the premier champion of M.L. Andreessen's theology, repackaging it as the famous harvest principle, the idea that Christ cannot return until a final generation perfectly reproduces his character. Pearson gave Douglas a global megaphone. By the way, traditional Adventists aren't saying they do it on their own merit. They're almost saying God infuses his ability and love in us so much that we just don't sin, because we are influenced so greatly by the nourishment of Jesus that we won't sin. And of course, Satan claims that humans can't do that if you remove the puppeteer. And so traditional Adventism talks about a time where you will have to stand without that mediator. That's one of the core Adventist doctrines. You stand without Jesus in the time of trouble after probation is closed, and you don't sin. And you no longer have Jesus there to puppet you. And you will vindicate God. Anyway. Yes, so the harvest principle was the idea that Christ cannot return until a final generation perfectly reproduces his character. And Pearson gave Douglas a global megaphone. And Herbert Douglas later did a lot of work with the Standish brothers, the engine room behind the CBs. But here is the piece of history the church rarely talks about. In 1976, the Palmdale Conference was called to resolve the growing theological warfare between Australian theologian Desmond Ford, who championed salvation by grace alone, and the traditional perfection-oriented LGT defenders. He was a champion against the last generation theology. He opposed that so magnificently that he was often referred to as the Luther of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, good luck with that, you followers. You did a good effort for a while, but 46 years later, after Glacier View, you haven't really gotten behind your Luther that well, have you? At Palmdale, a compromise statement was actually reached that leaned heavily toward Ford's evangelical view of justification. Remember, this is in 1976. But when the delegation got back to Washington, Pierce's GC administration quietly suppressed the full statement, refusing to publish it in its entirety in the review. Why? Because the plan was already in motion behind the scenes, outgoing President Pearson and the incoming leader Neil Wilson, yes, Ted Wilson's father, conspired to draw a definitive line in the sand against Des Ford's new theology. They deliberately singled Ford out, setting the stage for a massive administrative and theological execution. Palmdale wasn't the resolution. It was the trap that led directly to the infamous 1980 Glacier View showdown, where Ford was defrocked. Pearson's commitment to this perfectionist theology is immortalized in his dramatic, weeping 1978 resignation sermon at the annual council, where he stood before the church leaders and warned them against moving away from the historic, perfection-oriented landmarks of the pioneer message. So the myth of the 1978 peak, and this person I'm about to mention, I've interviewed several times, great guy. These are not criticisms. These are just observations that gospel Adventists, progressive Adventists, liberal Adventists are a little bit ostrich-like, head in the sand. So centrist church historians like Michael Campbell argue that LGT peaked around 1978 and then faded. Well, that is flat out wrong. What actually happened was a brilliant public relations pivot. After M.L. Andreessen was disciplined by the church, the name Last Generation Theology became radioactive. You know, I'm paraphrasing. That concept, that teaching, that focus became radioactive. So the leadership, and this is as the gospel Adventists gained power and momentum. Yes, so the leadership simply dropped the label and made the mechanics of the theology the institutional default. Take a look at how this DNA was passed down directly to Neil Wilson's son, Ted Wilson, who served as the Seventh Adventist Church's GC president, General Conference president, from 2010 until his retirement at the 2025 General Conference session. For 15 years, Ted Wilson used his platform to keep functional LGT alive and well under alive and well under names like Revival and Reformation and the Three Angels Messages. When fans asked him directly on his official Q&A site, Ted Wilson safely downplayed the special brand name of LGT to avoid a public heresy trial, advising that we should not claim perfection. But in the exact same breath, he reinforced the exact core mechanic of Andreessen's theological writing. He wants to use, this is in quotation marks, Ted Wilson, he wants to use his remnant church in a most powerful way, humbling ourselves before our Creator and denying self so that Jesus can control us and overcome our sin, so that Jesus can come. That is pure, unadulterated, last generation theology. The return of Christ is delayed, and it is entirely dependent on human behavior and sinless living to trigger the end. Now, of course, I think that is cray-cray. Of course, gospel, liberal, progressive, reformative Adventists think it's cray-cray. Where progressives and I disagree, and one of the reasons I left, is that the progressives think that it's not marinated at the core of Adventism, that it's kind of an anomaly. Whereas I think, no, it is Adventism. You are not going to change that. You've got something new. You've got something good. Go for it. Be bold. I'm going to give a couple of examples in a moment where I believe certain gospel Adventists weren't bold, but I don't judge them for it because of that time period and the context of where they were. But now, if gospel Adventists say the same things that I'm about to read that some progressives have said in the past, now I think they are culpable. Now I think it's time for them to stand up. If you stand up and be clear about what you believe, then we former Adventists can have a better uh, way of confronting your claims. Right, back to my little script here. So the mainstream message today and the new era. If you want proof that this theology is the corporate mainstream of Adventism, look no further than Adventism institutional architecture, our youth movements, and our current leadership. First, consider fundamental belief number 24, the sanctuary doctrine. Mainstream Adventism explicitly rejects the popular evangelical view that the atonement was finished entirely at the cross. Official church doctrine states that Christ is currently in the most holy place, blotting out sins. If the atonement is an open, ongoing courtroom drama in heaven, then the lifestyle and character of the believer on earth are explicitly tied to the closing of the sanctuary. You cannot have the investigative judgment without functionally creating an LGT requirement for the people that are alive when probation closes. Now, I've interviewed Clifford Goldstein. Secondly, let's look at the GC Sabbath School materials, edited for decades by Clifford Goldstein, who is often held up and claimed on my show as well. Hey, Clifford, come back. I loved chatting to you. Claimed on the show, and people, liberal Adventists, are often holding him up as an example of a gospel Adventist. But the Adult Sabbath School Bible Study Guide routinely presents the great controversy through a functional LGT lens. It continually defends Ellen White's famous quote from Christ's Object Lessons, page 69. When the character of Christ shall be perfectly reproduced in his people, then he will come to claim them as his own. Now, the Clifford Goldsteins of the world that are really peddling, the same with Light Bearers and David Asherick and Ty Gibson, in my humble opinion, I could be wrong, allegedly, Arise, etc. They are peddling traditional Adventist teachings, but making it seem more appealing. And when they are challenged about the legalistic approach they have when you dig deep, they say, no, it's about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. We focus on Jesus. And hey, don't you want to be a better person? But when pressed to say, well, is keeping the Sabbath a salvific requirement? Oh, down other little, distracting pathways they run. Mainstream lesson quarterlies frame this as maturity rather than legalism. But the structural requirement remains identical to Andreessen's book, The Sanctuary Service. The final generation must stand perfectly without sin to vindicate God's law before the universe. That's the thrust of Andreessen's book, The Sanctuary Service. And I can show you the parallels between the Sabbath Quarterly and that very book. And thirdly, look at the massive influence of independent conservative youth ministries. Now, people say to me, Peter, you don't have your finger on the pulse. The church is changing. This kind of legalism is dying out. And I'm like, really? What do you mean? I do have my finger on the pulse. I am watching for 10 hours a week. I'm watching and reading and researching this stuff and loving every minute of it. I can't take my eyes off it. Adventism's like Bold and the Beautiful. I'm not a Seventh Adventist. I'm not going to come back to Adventism. But wow, what an interesting drama to watch. Anyway, this massive influence with the youth ministries like GYC, Generation Youth Christ. GYC has spent the last 2 decades bypassing progressive North American universities and teaching tens of thousands of young people that they are the literal last generation, called to a lifestyle of strict obedience, primitive godliness, and character perfection to finish the work. Okay, finally, let's look at the current reality. At the General Conference session in July 2025, Ted Wilson was succeeded by I keep saying our current, that's what people pick up on. He's still an Adventist. No, that's a Marion Davis glitch there. I'll have to chat to my Marion GP Chat Davis and fix that. So succeeded by current World Church President Erton Kohler. Kohler, the former GC Secretary and the first president from South America, represents an administrative shift toward global mission, structure, and intense unified focus. But does the theology change under Kohler? Absolutely not. While Kohler uses softer, highly collaborative language, famously stating at the October 2025 Executive Committee that unity is a recurring challenge and we must move past our differences and choose unity for mission instead, the LGT bedrock remains perfectly intact. Just look at who Kohler has working directly alongside him. Powerful TV evangelist Mark Finley, who serves as an assistant to Kohler. Just recently, Finley released a massive video presentation, boldly and unambiguously titled, "Why Last Generation is Biblical." When President Kohler speaks to the church, he reinforces the exact same sanctuary-centered, character-focused themes. In a recent spiritual appeal, Kohler reminded the global church, "You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord." He expanded on this calling in a 2026 ministerial message, stating that a deep, victorious relationship with God is not a distant ideal, it is a present calling. Spiritual growth is intentional. It is formed in quiet moments, in prayer, in the word, in surrender. Each step matters. And that all sounds good. We all want to grow spiritually, but look at the bigger picture here. It's about growing spiritually, so that at some point you can stand without a mediator, sinless, with God's inner work having been done to achieve a perfect character. And look, this is where people say, that's not my Adventism. Good, I'm glad it's not. But what is your Adventism? If that is not your Adventism, what is your Adventism? And you will go on to tell me and share what your Adventism is, and I will listen and I will say, cool, that's great. Well, why are you quiet about it? Why won't you publicly, unless you are retired, but if you are ordained and employed, why is it like pulling teeth out of a rooster to get you guys on the show saying what your Adventism is? So, to my progressive friends who claim last generation theology was a minor glitch in the matrix that died out with Robert Pearson in 1978 when he retired, you are historically and modernly incorrect. Pearson, Wood, Douglas, and Neil Wilson institutionalized this theology by clearing out the evangelical opposition. Ted Wilson spent 15 years reinforcing its core principles, and today, under Erton Kohler, the global administration continues to defend the sanctuary. Back LGT-aligned evangelists and preach that human character perfection is the key to ushering in the second coming. LGT isn't a fringe heresy. Last generation theology is and has always been the corporate brand identity of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so, friends that write books like this, good on you, thumbs up. But you aren't reclaiming a prophet, you're rewriting history. You are desiring a kind of Adventism that's sure, it's good, it's different. So embrace it. And good on you for trying, lady and gentleman. Good on you for trying. Keep going. You're doing a good job, kind of. You're just in a little bit of denial. So if you're watching today's stream, what do you think? I'm about to read Pearson's article. It's very short. It's going to be a short show today, I think. But what do you think? I can take this show in a few different directions in future episodes. Let me know in the chat right now if you want me to maybe go layer by layer through M.L. Andreessen's original text next to a modern Sabbath School Quarterly to show the identical phrasing. Do you want me to do a deep dive into the secret meeting transcripts leading up to Glacier View and the Desmond Ford trial? The Palm meetings and also the secret Daniel meetings? Do you want me to take a closer look at Mark Finley's recent defense of LGT under the Kohler administration? Let me know your thoughts. And anyway, we will keep the conversation going. So I have been receiving the Remnant Herald for many, many years. I would say decades. I would say since it was founded in 1992, I've been receiving the Remnant Herald. Someone pays a donation and sends it to me every time it comes out. I think is it a quarterly? I'm not sure. There's the details if you want to go and subscribe. And it was in the recent magazine that I came across this article. I like to keep my finger on the pulse, you see. I like to read both kinds of Adventism. I like Verdict. I'm working my way through scores of copies of that. I read the Remnant Herald, Anchor magazine. I interview people, over 580 interviews with people, and to keep a sense of balance and to help me have written my new book. I've purposely read all sides of the material. My finger is on the pulse, I believe. So, just quickly before we do that, I'll come to it. I have a slight outline and a plan prepared. I will come to that. So here's the article. And the point of me reading this is to show from the horse's mouth this fine gentleman who played a bit of, shall we say, Machiavellian role with Neil Wilson to get rid of Des Ford. But when you look at it from back a ways a little bit, these guys are just trying to protect their church. Gospel Adventists, you don't realize you are a Trojan horse placed. Yes, you were born into it or you joined it under false, you were given false hope as well. The false hope you gave me, my generation, was given to you because of books like Questions on Doctrine. You joined the church. Many of you aren't multi-generational Adventists. A lot of you gospel Adventists aren't. And you came in, some of you are, but you came in or you were raised in such a way to think the fertile soil for new theology and a more Bible-focused movement was at your fingertips. And Pearson responded to this in this article, and he, Neil, and Jan Paulson tried his best to have unity through diversity, but that failed. Great guy, incredible human. You guys are incredible, you gospel Adventists. You're incredible. You're just a little bit naive, like I was. And I said the same things to people. Hey, things are changing. Stick around. Mow lawns, not reputations. Happy Sabbath. Let's have a bush dance. Let's stay in the church and bring about a more Jesus-focused, Bible-centered, gospel message, and we can change this movement. I was the same as you guys. It's not changing because it is rock solid. Those pillars, that's what they're called, pillars. Remove them and the building falls down. Stop trying to remove the pillars, gospel Adventists. You cannot do it. Okay, what are we? 45 minutes. It's going to be a short show. I'll come to comments and chat in a minute. I haven't been looking at them because I'm on a roll. I don't want to be distracted. But by the way, thank you everybody for your support of the show. This latest project, writing this book, part of doing it um, has cost quite a bit of money because um, I've got I paid a platform to transcribe and go through all 580 interviews, go through all of my other writings on social media on my thoughts on this topic of this kind of civil war that's going on between the Adventist Church, and to use my material and collate it. So it was exactly like Ellen White. I have all the ideas, I write them down, typing on social media, I have conversations, I've amassed a wealth of resources. And then I've gone to ChatGPT, Marion Davis, my Fanny Bolton, and I've said, look, here are my thoughts, bang, on my night table that I've written all these ideas that have come to me in vision. Put them into a easy to understand, collated, in order piece of work. So it cost quite a lot of money to get that done, and I didn't want to fundraise for it. I just wanted to make it happen, and so I've been working on that for months now, and I've written 18 chapters. It is in draft form, and I will now publish it and sell it as cheap as possible. But it's a positive take on this. I'm not having. I'm probably sounding more angsty towards gospel Adventists, but that's only if you're not listening properly to what I'm saying, or I'm not articulating myself correctly. But it's a positive book. I can't wait to share it, and now that I've kind of announced it, I have to make it happen. But yeah, your support greatly helps what I'm doing. If you are able to throw a few coins my way, I will be putting all of that into compiling this book and paying back what what I've already spent. So please, that would be a great help if you can support me with that. A few dollars over there at PayPal goes a long way. And that then leads into my second big project I've been working on, but I'm going to share that at a later date. Right, let's look at this article and then we'll look at some questions, and then I'll head off, go and find a cafe and enjoy the view of the lake. Okay, here's the article published in the Review and Herald, December 13, 1973. As gospel Adventism, Ford, and incredible music was being created by Paul Johnson, Bob Wolfgram, young people like me were becoming teenagers and going, wow, this is exciting, this is awesome. Pearson, on the other hand, was going, uh-oh, let's go and put a blanket on that. Let's hose some cold water on that. Let's suppress it. Let's kick it out, because these guys are stealing our movement. And he was correct. Well assessed, Robert. Here we go. Why hasn't the work been finished? Why hasn't Jesus come? And why aren't the saints in the kingdom? Today we hear different reasons, advanced explaining why we are still in the land of the enemy. It is a matter of character development, some say. Others declare the Great Commission has not been fulfilled. The Advent message has not yet been proclaimed as a witness to all nations. Still others contend that the Church has not fully accepted the message of righteousness by faith as presented at the 1888 General Conference session held in Minneapolis. Hence the loud cry has not sounded. The work is not finished, and we are still here. All of these explanations may be contributing factors, but I want to give you another thought worth pursuing, worth your prayerful consideration. When you wonder about the delay in the Lord's return, read these words of God's last day prophet thoughtfully. They were written in the year 1901. I quote Ellen White. We may have to remain here in this world because of insubordination many more years, as did the children of Israel, but for Christ's sake. His people should not add sin to sin by charging God with the consequence of their own wrong course of action. Evangelism, page 696, letter 184, 1901. Back to Robert. Insubordination is disregard for authority. In this instant, disregard for the authority of the Word of God and the spirit of prophecy. Disregard for the counsel God has so clearly and so graciously given to his last day people. And from Proverbs, because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand and no man regarded. They would none of my counsel. They despised all my reproof. Proverbs 1:24 and 30. In Moses' day, God's chosen nation suffered from the same spiritual malady that plagues the people of God in our day. Back to Ellen White in Evangelism. For 40 years did unbelief, murmuring, and rebellion shut out ancient Israel from the land of Canaan. The same sins have delayed the entrance of modern Israel into the heavenly Canaan. In neither case were the promises of God at fault. It is the unbelief, the worldliness, unconsecration, and strife among the Lord's professed people that have kept us in this world of sin and sorrow so many years. Evangelism, page 96, manuscript 4, 1883. In these words, Ellen White expands upon insubordination, linking it closely with unbelief, murmuring, and rebellion. She further describes some of the results of deliberate disregard for the authority and counsel of God. It is manifest in worldliness, unconsecration, and sometimes strife. Ah, you say, but where have we disregarded the Lord's admonition? When have we spurned his counsel? Let us take a prayerful look at some inspired statements that should cause us to ponder and pray most earnestly. How do you measure up? Quoting Ellen White. God has called us to uplift the standard of his downtrodden Sabbath. How important, then, that our example in Sabbath keeping should be right. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 6, page 352 and 353. Robert goes on, there is no question about it. More of us than we care to admit have grown lax in remembering God's holy day. Pleasure trips, beach excursions, restaurant dining, idle talk. What about God's counsel regarding true Sabbath observance? Are we insubordinate? Remember, this is coming to Adventists from their key magazine, Review and Herald, from the leader of the church. Some of you may be tempted to turn me off at this juncture. Just another harangue on externals, legalism. I appeal to you to hear me through. You will find plenty of Jesus before I finish. Weaponizing Jesus. Good on you. Many of us need to do more praying and changing. When we read these next lines, again, Ellen White, obedience to fashion is pervading our Seventh-day Adventist churches and is doing more than any other power to separate our people from God. It's in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 647. Robert writes, if true when written, how is it with us now? As in, when it was written back then, how is it with us now? Don't slip over this inspired counsel too quickly. as their seeds of insubordination to the solemn warnings regarding light that many pass off with a gesture of the hand as merely an external, God says it is separating many from Him. Ellen White says, what about amusements? The true Christian will not desire to enter to any place of amusement or engage in any diversion which he cannot ask the blessing of God. The Adventist Home, page 515, Review and Herald, February 28, 1882. Think it over, says Robert. Insubordination? Could the following statements have any relationship to your practice? Ellen G. White again. Tea and coffee drinking is a sin. Let that sink in, everybody. Tea and coffee drinking is a sin. That's Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 425, letter 44, 1896. I think she was living down the road just here in Australia at that time, writing Desire of Ages, no doubt, with the help of Marion Davis. She adds, many who are now only half converted on the question of meat eating will go from God's people to walk no more with them. Same book, page 382, Review and Herald, May 27, 1902. 1902. But Ellen progressed as she went through her life. She progressed. Say the Gospel Adventists, Reformation Adventists, Liberal Adventists. Think about these words, says Robert. Next time you eat out or at home, our diet, the Lord's messenger declares, may kindle fires of insubordination. Ellen White says, as a general thing, the Lord did not provide his people with flesh meat in the desert because he knew that the use of this diet would create disease and insubordination. That's from the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 1, page 1112 and 1113. Manuscript 38, 1898. Robert continues, dare we treat these words lightly? Do they apply to you, to me? Some who have to do with the operation of medical institutions perhaps should think on some further inspired counsel also. Ellen White says, meat eating should not come into the prescription for any invalids from any physicians from among those who understand these things. Disease in cattle is making meat eating a dangerous matter. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 411, letter 59, 1898. Robert continues, does rationalizing ever become insubordination? The Word of God has something to say about worldliness. This is from King James. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And that's 1 John 2:15, King James Version. How easily the world obscures our Father's face. And now he turns his attention to music. What about our music? But before I read it on, and we're nearly finished, in this article, they refer to part of an article. Can I get that in focus? Written by Robert H. Parr. Now, Robert, it's well documented that behind the scenes, Robert Parr was a supporter of Des Ford. And this is what I was going to say earlier. I'm about to mention two names of people that are what Gospel Adventists and Reformation Adventists, Liberal Adventists, Progressive Adventists, that's not my Adventism, Adventists, would would say that people like this were on their side. I've lost my train of thought. Anyway, these guys that I'm about to mention, I'm not criticizing. I said the same things. Honestly, I said almost identical things. I believed it. I supported the Des Ford theology. I played music that was more modern with the hope of influencing young people to bring about a change within Adventism. I'm not criticizing these guys for what I'm about to read that they have said, that appears to be a little bit playing both sides. I'm not judging that. I know what that feels like to be such a strong believer in bringing about change, but having to do it in a careful way. My point is that this kind of thing that they were doing and that I did has reached its use by date, and those who are continuing to do it are now, in my humble opinion, being disingenuous. And I'm so thankful for many people like John Den, David Thiel, many of these guys who, now that they're retired, are really speaking the truth that they couldn't speak back then. And I fully understand that they couldn't speak it back then. No judgment. All I suggest is that myself, all the gospel Adventists, the progressive Adventists, those that were trying to bring about change in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and beyond, step back and say, okay, we did what we did. No judgment. It wasn't dishonest. But where are we now? What happens next? What can we learn from the past? Anyway, so Robert Parr was the editor of the Australasian Record. They just call it Record now. June 3, 1974, he wrote, "If you appear in the house of God in an untidy and disheveled state, if you are wearing clothes that are inappropriate for God's sanctuary and your own good taste, and your parents ought to be your guide in this situation, if your hair is such that it is untidy and unkempt, if your skirts are too short or too tight, or your dress too low cut, in other words, immodest, and if your deportment and demeanor are distracting to others and dishonoring to God, and you know it, as inevitably you must, if these things describe you, then you, if you are old enough to read and understand this, then you stand guilty before God of appearing before Him in a manner unbecoming, and you must take the consequences." Now, some people think, and I've said those things, and I still believe in actually being modest and being careful how you present and dress, particularly if you're in a sacred setting. I'm not disagreeing with his words, but I'm focusing on that last little bit. You must take the consequences. And if you understand the context of when it was said, it's not just about some kind of powerful, passionate, get your standards in order church. There's an added bit there implied, because the church is not going to see Jesus unless you do. I don't want to put words into his mouth, and I'm not saying that these progressives were being dishonest or disingenuous at all back then. But the time has come, I believe, in my humble opinion, said with love in my heart, that the gospel Adventists, the good guys, the people trying to move away from cray-cray LGT theology to a more Bible-focused one, it's time, I believe, for you guys to be more forthright and to stand up. And just little things. If you believe that women should be ordained, okay, don't wait for that to change. Stand up now. Your silence is making you complicit. The other person I wanted to read, and Nancy Page gave me this, and I'm 99% sure it's the actual original, hand-signed. It's on the letterhead there. That's Raymond Cottrell. And, he was almost ground zero for coming out after questions on doctrine and really questioning the sanctuary doctrine and really hand on heart trying to bring Adventism into a more gospel Christ-centered Bible-based movement. This is a man who is his reputation is strong and sound and comes from an absolute place of conviction and desiring a better movement to move away from legalism and focus on a Christ-centered belief system. But in this thing, and this is what I did, this is what many people did, and I've got 2 original letters from him. He's writing to Carrie Johnson, who wrote, "I was Canwright's secretary," which absolutely destroyed Canwright's reputation, and is a book that I think is almost laughable in the way it shamefully speaks about Canwright. And Nancy Page, who gave me these documents, is the granddaughter of Carrie Johnson, and I've done 2 shows with her. And this is an example of when you are indoctrinated and brainwashed and so closely identify yourself with Adventism that you find yourself saying things. So he writes in this, there's a guy called Elder Charles Barnes, who is the publishing department's secretary. This is Review and Herald Publishing Association, at which time Raymond F. Cottrell was book editor. And please, someone correct me. There's 2 Cottrells. Is this the Cottrell, the famous Cottrell that championed righteousness by faith, spoke against the sanctuary? I hope I'm, speaking correctly here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, Elder Charles Barnes, the department secretary of the Columbia Union Conference, wrote this to Raymond, and Raymond is now writing to Dear Sister Johnson. And Charles Barnes writes, "It seems to me that I Was Canwright's secretary is an excellent book and one that will have a long life. It was much better than I'd anticipated. The editors and the author are to be commended." And Ray adds, "I agree. God's blessing be with you." And in another letter, he brings that home even more so by saying, "You have done your part well. We will try to do ours equally well. The Lord's blessing be with you each day." And he talks about the contract that they're sending out to her. When I read that, and again, it's so hard to say stuff like that because these guys are the champions, and there'd be quote after quote you could say from me that was really similar, where on the one hand, we thought that being inside the Adventist church, wanting it to change, we had to kind of toe the line a bit. And then at the same time, we also saw ourselves as dissidents and revolutionaries. We were part of a Reformation movement. And, we see things differently now. So I'm not attacking these guys just like I'm not attacking myself. It's ridiculous. But on the one hand, we enabled and supported this crazy movement. And a lot of people, the guys that wrote this book, the guys and girl, genuinely love Ellen G. White. They love her. And they can't get away from her. I remember when Steve Daly's book came out, the first one. Well, he's written many books, but the big one, just got a mental blank. Sorry, Steve. I thought that it was going to be embraced by the progressive Adventists because it was revealing Ellen White in ways that they had all done. All of the guys that were in that book I just showed, they've spent decades revealing the real Ellen White to me, and it shook me and shocked me so much that I eventually left the church. And when Steve's book came out, I thought, yeah, they're going to love it. Man, they hated it. They just absolutely tried to decimate Steve Daly in his character. And I just couldn't quite work it out. Then they said it was because of his style of writing, and he was kind of speculating. Well, Steve might speculate with things like he will say Ellen White predicted that the Lord would come back in 3 months, and she said a few months. Well, we're speculating that a few months kind of does mean 3 months, but his material and resources, his quotations, his references, you can't fault them. And so there's this kind of there's a confirmation bias, and there's another word for it as well. I'll try and find and bring up on the screen if I can, that really nails it, where even the most powerful factual information that comes your way that proves your beliefs wrong, if your identity is so sewn up in it, you will find every possible way to not let go of it. And one of the things you will do is criticize people that are shaking your identity. That happened to me. My identity and belief in Adventism was so strong. I left at age 54, 10 years ago. And I thought I would never leave. And, that whole thought process is a whole other topic. But I'm aware that when I criticize gospel Adventists, they're not listening anymore to what I'm saying. They're like, he's attacking me, my beliefs, my identity. And so out come the more nuanced ad hominem attacks. And the gospel progressive liberal Adventists are masters at just attacking you as a person and your character, and not actually addressing the claims, the criticisms. Not everybody, but that's how some of them go. Like recently, a couple of gospel Adventists were saying that former Adventists are just a cult. And yeah, that's right. They've got all the same signs as cult leaders. Former Adventists range from atheists to Pentecostals to non-believers and believers and everyone in between. The only thing that unites the former Adventist is the history of having been one, and a sense of relief from having left, and a sense of a desire to say, hey guys, you might want to take a closer look at some of your claims. There's agitation, there's a dissident nature, there's a stirring of the pot vibe. But I would say the former Adventists I have met, from angry to happy to bitter to calm to over it, to atheist to agnostic to full-on believers, all have a sense of relief and insight and and a desire to even challenge their own beliefs, as well as examine where they've come from a pure heart. There's a lot of good faith that I would offer to my former Adventist friends. There's a real sense of good faith there. And I don't really see that coming from Adventist apologists. Okay, back to the article. It's nearly finished. And Robert Pearson, in this article, December 13, 1973, says, "What about our music?" And this one was interesting for me. I haven't checked chat. I don't know if anyone is still there. I hope so, and I hope some of you can see light in what I'm saying, or at least having pleased that we're having a conversation and that these topics are talked about. So this is Ellen White. Music is acceptable to God only when the heart is sanctified and made soft and holy by its facilities. But many who delight in music know nothing of making melody in their hearts to the Lord. Their heart is gone after their idols. She writes that in 1899, Evangelism, page 512. Pearson adds, do some of our tastes and choices ever become insubordination? This is his theme. Are you getting it? Insubordination. Teachers, school administrators, and board members may well pray over this instruction. Ellen writes, we do not honour God when we go aside from the only true God to inquire of the God of Ekron. The question is asked, is it because there is not a God in Israel that ye have gone to the God of Ekron to inquire? That's from the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 2, page 1036, Manuscript 41, 1894. I hadn't heard about this Ekron before. I'm still not too sure what it's all about. Pearson adds, I realise all too well some of the complexities we face in our educational program today. I do not want to be critical, but I'm anxious. How frequently, perhaps unconsciously, do we pattern portions of our educational program after Ekron? And how prominent a role does the Bible play in our church schools, academies, colleges, universities? Bookstands are choked with cheap literature these days. Is there any counsel for us on this subject? Ellen White says, cheap works of fiction do not profit. They impart no real knowledge. They take time which should be given to the practical duties of life and to the service of God. She wrote that in 1884 in Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 92. Youth's Instructor, September 10. Pearson writes, recently a friend of mine, whom most of you would know if I mentioned his name, wrote me a letter. Wrote me a letter after we had concluded a prayerful discussion on insubordination. I want to share 2 paragraphs of his letter with you. He sums it all up in these words. I believe that as we get the fuller view, which one cannot escape when he gets into this study of the deeper element of authority, as Ellen White puts it, insubordination, our minds will be led to see some of the elements which can easily stand in the way of the speedy finishing of the work. To name a few, we might list a growing laxness in Sabbath observance, an acceleration in the experience of Seventh-day Adventists in resorting to law and lawsuits, laying their troubles before the courts of the land, which is forbidden in the Word of God and pointed out as being particularly offensive to God, laxness in regard, and this is before Davenport fiasco, but it was brewing. It was brewing. And I'm, some of these guys, these leaders, were part of the Ponzi scheme. It wasn't illegal. Was it unethical? It was stupid. They were ripped off. Davenport himself was a player. Anyway, that's a whole other episode. laxness in regard to the health reform in its broad aspects, and in some cases defiance, pride, and the love of dress, and the lack of modesty in dress. And he goes on to say, some of the first counsels to the church having to do with a relationship with God touched on this point. The constant struggle over ornamentation, jewelry, and the wedding ring. The flouting of the counsels which have come to us regarding the disparity in the remuneration of physicians and other denominational workers. Ellen White portrayed very clearly our publishing house in Battle Creek, and this was one of the problems in the 1890s and the medical work. The dishonesty on the part of church members in their obligations to God concerning the tithe, and I could go on, he says, and then Pearson is back. Only externals, little things, you say? When we disregard God's counsel, and it is causing us to remain in this world, the name of the game in heaven's language is insubordination. There, that's a really important little paragraph there. I admire people who say, hey, look, let's be more modest. Let's stop being extreme. Let's eat well. Let's try and be better people. Let's be kinder to each other. Let's try and downplay some of the excesses that we implement and carry on with in life. I am all for that. But Adventism is not about standards for the sake of being a better person. Only externals, he says, little things. When we disregard God's counsel, Ellen G. White, and it is causing us to remain in this world, lowering our standards, the name of the game in heaven's language is insubordination. It is causing us to remain in this world. So he's not meaning it's causing us to be of the world, following its low standards. This insubordination is causing us to remain in the world and stopping the return of Jesus. Does it annoy us to be reminded of these things? Reproof is distasteful to the human heart. And I think he's quoting Ellen White next. The spirit of murmuring against reproof has been taking root and is bearing its fruit of insubordination, says Ellen White in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 109. Look, she didn't change. This is me talking if you're listening on the podcast. She didn't change as she grew older. Yes, of course she had some different ideas and different perspectives, and 1888 taught her that you don't have to work to get to the throne of God. God will fill you and help you to work. But from the thrust of her message from when she was 17 to when she died in 1915 is what he is accurately portraying. Pearson is accurately portraying the message of Ellen White and Adventism. He goes on to say parents may contribute to insubordination in their children. Ellen White writes, if the parents would stand pledged to sustain the authority of the teacher, much insubordination, vice, and profligacy would be prevented. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 89. And of course, say I. These are important things to learn, to be discerning and to have discipline in your life. But they don't hasten the return of Christ or slow it down. Pearson adds, some of us as pastors, church officers, and administrators should prayerfully consider whether we are guilty of insubordination in our hearts of fellow leaders of church members by conducting our work as dictators. Pot kettle black. Ellen White, he says, adds, the high-handed power that has been developed as though position has made men gods makes me afraid and ought to cause fear. It is a curse wherever and by whomsoever it is exercised. This lording it over God's heritage will create such a disgust of man's jurisdiction that a state of insubordination will result. Testimonies to the Ministers and Gospel Workers, page 361. Pearson continues, and we're only paragraphs away from finishing. The Lord has placed among his people as shepherds, has placed his people as shepherds, never as dictators. How very much we need the spirit of our lovely Jesus. His was the spirit of obedience, of submission to the will of his heavenly Father. I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love, John 15:10. With Jesus, there was no striving, no resisting. He willingly and fully yielded himself day by day to the leading of his Father. Nothing was too small, nothing was too great to prompt his loving obedience. He was, as it says in Hebrews, in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience. Sorry, though he were a son, he yet learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Hebrews 5:8. Again in Hebrews, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Hebrews 12:2. With Jesus, it was not a question of how little he could do to be in harmony with his Father's will. There was not the slightest trace of insubordination in his life or ministry. My meat is to do the will of him that sent me, John 4:36. I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father which hath sent me, John 5:30. When the evil one tempted the Master with love of the world, Jesus set the example we as God's people must follow today. Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again, the devil taketh him up into the exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Matthew 4:7-10. Neither did he falter on the question of appetite or on any other point. We have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Hebrews 4:15. Jesus was obedient to every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Matthew 4:4. No insubordination. You can see what he's doing here, right, listeners, friends, countrymen? He's suggesting that Jesus lived a sinless life. He wasn't insubordinate. So therefore we can too. And that's the greatest error of Adventism. That's the greatest lie within Adventism. It's at the heart of the Adventist doctrine that because Jesus didn't sin, we can emulate him. Those of you that have looked at the Bible teaching on that know that Christ led a sinless life so that he could be a pure sacrifice at the final atonement, not as an example to emulate and follow to vindicate God and be sinless. Yes, Christ is an example, of course. But if you think being sinless like Christ is the goal so that you can get into heaven, you have totally misunderstood the teaching of atonement, sacrifice, and judgment. And if you are an Adventist apologist, even one of the good guys, you are supporting a movement that at its very core teaches you that you need to emulate Christ's sinless character and behavior to get into heaven, and that the atonement didn't finish at the cross. Go and look at your fundamental number 24. Another Hebrews verse that he uses to gaslight his opinion. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him that appointed him. Hebrews 3:1-2. It's interesting that he could be using Hebrews and read Hebrews and totally miss the point. But he has accurately assessed Adventism. That's the point of Adventism. And it is, at its core, a blasphemous teaching. That doesn't mean good gospel people aren't in Adventism and can't preach the gospel and know the gospel better than I do, maybe. I don't even make belief claims. I'm just observing the civil war within Adventism and the contradictions and putting my 2 cents in. Pearson goes on to say, Jesus' blood provides the way out of this world, our acceptance of this provision, and our unconditional surrender to his will and authority is our only hope of entrance into his kingdom. Soon. Ellen White says, we may have to remain here in this world because of insubordination many more years. Those watching, look, Adventism is last generation theology to its core. Ellen White in Evangelism, page 696, letter 184 in 1901, towards the end of her life. We may have to remain here in this world for many, many years to come. Why? Because of our insubordination. And he closes with, Jesus provides a better way, the way of full submission and obedience to the will of our Heavenly Father. Result, an early entrance into his kingdom. So Jesus provides a better way. It's a way of full submission and obedience to our Heavenly Father. And if followed, the result will be an early entrance into his kingdom. The result will be that those who do that in that generation, because they've done that, they will hasten the Lord's return. Wow. Wow, 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 double wow, triple wow. Okay, well, we'll probably wrap it up there, but I am going to take a quick peek into the comments. Oh, wow. There have been many, many comments. Look, just to save me, I did not expect to have so many comments there. Just to save me going through them all to find relevant comments, let me just chat to you about tomorrow's program and the next day's program And can you write now in the chat if there's any comment specifically made to today's program? Agree, disagree, please do it now. And then while I'm just having a quick chat, that'll give you time to write it, cut and paste what you've said earlier, bring it onto the program, and I will bring it up now. I will take some time later and go through the chat. I really appreciate it. So did Ellen's 1901 letter say it was because of our insubordination that we may have to stay here for many years to come, or was the correlation made by me? Well, that's a good question. I don't want to be speculative. What do you think the general thrust of what she said and what that whole article was about, what Pearson said? It's not really about the correlation I'm making, is it? The correlation of this whole program has been Pearson's summary of Adventism, I believe, is accurate. That is speculative, maybe, but I think I've provided some good information there. But when she wrote, we may have to remain here in this world because of insubordination many more years, did Ellen's 1901 letter say it was because of our insubordination that we may have to stay here for many years to come? Or was the correlation herself? Well, Dr. Worm, she said it in that quote. So it's not just a correlation made by me. I'll read it again. Page 696 in Evangelism, 1901, letter 184. We may have to remain here in this world because of insubordination. Many, many more years. So I guess the way I read it, you might think that I added the insubordination. No, I quote. So thank you, Dr. Worm. I think you're helping me explain that more clearly. Thank you. Quotation mark. We have to remain here. Sorry. Again, quotation mark. We may have to remain here in this world because of insubordination many more years. Close quotes. Ellen White, 1901. So yeah, not my speculation, not my correlation. 100% hers. Ray Doherty, good to hear from you, Ray, has asked, is there a link to the article? Look, that is a very good question. It is in the Remnant Herald, which is a very traditional support magazine. I'm just bringing it up again. But I'm sure if you Google Robert H. Pearson, former SDA GC president, Review and Herald, December 13, 1973, it will come up. Maybe someone could do that now and just find out. Looks like there's some really great conversations have gone on. And yes, you've added there, Dr. Worm. We know what Pearson believed. I was just checking on the quote you made from Ellen. Yep. Thank you for clarifying that. Good point. And hopefully I have clarified it is what Ellen White thought. It is what she said. No speculation, no added thought from me. That's what she said, word for word. Look, if progressives, someone wrote to me this morning when I was promoting this show and said nonsense. Now, they weren't calling me nonsense. They are a gospel Adventist, but they were saying that my premise was nonsense and that last generation theology is nonsense, that Adventism isn't last generation theology. So they were saying that the theory is nonsense and also that last generation is nonsense. Well, I wrote back and said, my theory isn't wrong. And I think I've proven that today. But yes, last generation theology. Cray. Yeah, Dr. Worm. Sorry, I did get that wrong, what you were saying. Apologies if I sounded defensive. I've always enjoyed your comments. This is a good one. Thank you, Cindy Lou. So the billions and billions of humans prior to 1863 were just floating around the cosmos, waiting for the SDAs to come fix the world for them. Whoa, peeps, you done got scammed. Yeah. Remember, Peter, Ellen said Christ left his divinity in heaven. Yes, yes, yes. God is calling many out of Adventism. Lately, I have been more forthright in my opinion that traditional Adventists, so I don't just say come out of Adventism, but I say traditional Adventists, you have accurately assessed your church's claims. And though your beliefs are cray-cray, you actually have nailed it when you say what Adventism is. You are the real Adventists, so I'm sure you will stay. Leadership, some people say you're all just about the money and you're just a corporation trying to keep it all flowing so you can run it like a corporation. Hey, I don't know. I'm not saying that. That's what some people are saying. So I doubt you will leave, and I'm not even saying you should. Just like stirring you up a bit. Think about it. Cultural Adventists, I'm suggesting, don't leave, stay. What I in many ways I was a cultural Adventist and a progressive Adventist, and my identity was very wrapped up in the food and the friendships and the music and the incredibly talented people. Adventists are a very unique, interesting bunch. And the culture and the camaraderie is amazing. But I haven't had to let that go. I've left the church. But no doubt when I finish today's program, I will go to a local cafe and I will run into Adventists and I'll have a great conversation and they see me as a person and I'm part of the broader community. So cultural Adventists, I say stay. Progressive Adventists, I'm starting to think, look, either do something about it that is bold and actually reformative and get behind Des Ford's theology and ideas and Raymond Cottrell's ideas and a lot of the questions on doctrine ideas and either get behind it and make something of it collectively or just, stop trying to claim I'm wrong in my assessment. So I'm not saying leave, but I'm suggesting that I think you might be happier if you left. Oh dear. So yeah, tomorrow's program, I'm interviewing, just to double check I am, Justin Watson, who is very involved with helping people in situations where mental health may not be so strong or steady. He, I think, potentially is still an Adventist on the rolls, but he doesn't, I don't think he goes to church anymore. He wrote to me and said that he used to attend and just doesn't anymore. But he's got some really interesting insights that are kind of parallel a little bit with what Christy Williams says about trauma and mental health and how high demand movements can greatly impact you. And Adventism is not a benign movement. at its core, we've just established that its core teaching, not the gospel guys, not you guys, we know you don't believe this, but the core teaching of real Adventism is to emulate Christ. You better do it quick. The better you do it, you'll hasten the return of Jesus. And that the atonement wasn't finished at the cross. And it's a high demand movement. Is it a cult? Maybe it's a cult that the cult leader died, 100 years, 110 years ago. But either way, it's not a benign movement, and it impacts people's mental health. And tomorrow we will be chatting with an expert on that. Okay, we'll just see if that gave you some time to put some comments to me. And I like what Rick has said here. Everyone should leave Adventism and follow Jesus. It's funny how I was saying earlier, when I read people like Raymond Cottrell, who on the one hand was greatly challenging and stirring the pot, but very desirous to stay. But then offering praise to Canwright's. I was Canwright's secretary, Carrie Johnson. And I think, how could you do that? But I did that. I did that stuff. How could I do that? And even when I stopped doing that, I still remained an Adventist. I just focused on the good stuff. And I think, Rick, that maybe in the not too distant future, when I have fully defined my theory and released my book, which clearly does state that I'm happier having left the church. I think I will be able to step back and say, it's all crazy. Get out of her, run to the hills. I do think that that's where I'm headed. And in the meantime, I'm, just seeing what all the groups are. I will never lay blame on people for staying, of course. I respect people who look at the data, analyse, and draw their own conclusions. I've always said that. But Rick, I think you are correct that Adventism, even in its best tree-hugging, praise and worship singing, potluck, lunch, community dwelling, happy Sabbath, give me a hug, Adventism, even lurking in there, is something, as Christy Williams points out, involves one of the 4 reactions that affect people's mental health. They either fight, they flee, they freeze, or they fawn. So thank you for what you're saying there. I do like that. Everyone should leave Adventism and follow Jesus. And to those who are in Adventism saying, well, I am following Jesus in Adventism and I'm bringing about change, honestly, you don't really know that. I remember, I won't say, but yeah, people have said to me, I'm doing more inside the church than you could ever do outside the church. And I said to the person who I knew had never been outside the church, I said, have you ever left the church? Do you know? Can you compare? I can compare. I can compare and contrast the difference between being an Adventist and leaving. And as I've often said, I encourage people to go and watch my interview with John Butler and Ron Numbers. The interview on the book. Where is it? I thought I brought it. Not these guys, but they used the same cover. I've got it here. Where is it? It's back there. Yeah, there we go. Prophetess of Health. Go and watch my interview with Ron Numbers and John Butler. And I think, as much as I love both those gentlemen, and sadly Ron has left us, there's a liberation that Ron, it just comes out of him that I think John is still in bondage to. Boy, that's a big claim, isn't it? If you're watching, John, apologies. Okay, let's wrap it up. Dr. Worm says, which of the following scenarios would be your ideal desired outcome if you could wave a magic wand, Pete? I think I know who Dr. Worm is. I won't say. Which of the following scenarios would be your ideal desired outcome if you could wave a magic wand? I don't know. I really do believe that many SDA members are basically evangelicals who meet on Saturday. They often don't know the actual beliefs, hence the "that's not my Adventism" response. Very true. Dr. Worm says, A, for prog ads to rally more loudly and proudly around the One Project or some similar para-church organisation of prog ads that have organised themselves without official church sanction? Yeah, maybe. Or B, that someone prog ad, perhaps the One Project or similar, breaks away officially and starts a new denomination? Maybe. Or 3, C, that prog ad individuals en masse leave the church to the trad ads and leave the SDA church and find their own way, hopefully into other existing Protestant churches? Maybe. And if they do, it might be watered down and they only have 3 friends to hang out with and chat about this stuff. Okay, so be it. A fourth option, D, that prog ads stay within the official church and continue to coexist and advocate for the soul and direction of the official church? Maybe. That seems to be what they all do. Recognizing that it is a big and slow task to change the course of a large ship. One of the things, or E, something else. One of the things I've noticed is that the kind of change I refer to as brewing in the early 20s within Adventism, and I encourage everyone to go and read Gillian's great book, Bye Bye and Here's Why. And this is about Robert and Monica Vallis, 1930s, Basil Barnard, 1940s, Wally Drain, Bob Grieve in the 50s, and the reasons why almost all left the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's 90 plus years ago. Monica Vallis was at Avondale College chatting to Prescott in the 20s, and he'd just been a part of the 1919 Bible Conference. Comes over here, probably kicked out of the way because he was causing too much trouble. And so I guess what I'm saying, yeah, this slow task of changing the course of a large ship. One thing I would hope, so Dr. Worm, I would say this. One thing I would hope that progressive Adventists, that's not my Adventism, Adventists realize that the ship is not going to change course. Stay on the ship, jump off the ship, get into a lifeboat, build a new ship, throw it overboard and start your own ship. Do whatever you want to do. But know this, I hope the outcome of all the work I've done, know this, you will not change the course of the Adventist ship. You will not change Pearson's Adventism, Ted Wilson's Adventism. You will not and cannot change that ship's course. That's all I think that I want there to be an outcome from what I do if I could wave a magic wand. To have everyone go, oh, wow, it isn't going to change. And Ellen White is a false prophet. What do I do now? That's up to you. Ray says, what I do find disingenuous is when the individual does know the beliefs and denies that LGT is historic SDA doctrine or that the legalism isn't part of the system rather than a flaw to be corrected. 100% true. Cindy says there is no SDA without Ellie, the Sabbath, and the eternal revelation seminars. Dr. Worm adds, I agree with your statement that a lot of prog ads might be happier if they left. Sad but true in my opinion. Well, they think they're on some kind of special mission that they're going to modify and change and adjust and bring back the church to the Bible and to where it should be going. No, you're not. You're not on a special mission. You're just too scared to leave because your identity is so wrapped up with being an Adventist and being a cultural Adventist and you've got lots of friends. I can assure you, you don't lose those friends. I've got more friends now than I ever had. I don't think I think maybe 2% of Adventists left me as friends. It's a big myth that they all leave you. I definitely have a lot of negative things said about me, and I've got some friends that are a bit unhappy with me and think I'm disgruntled, but they still talk to me. I had one guy, a doctor, specialist in fact, and he said, oh, I don't like your show, you're just all a bunch of disgruntled former Adventists. And I said, oh yeah, whatever, you mustn't have watched any shows because we're not that disgruntled, we're just stirring the pot, asking some hard questions. And he said, yeah, anyway, what's that guitar you were playing on that last gig you did? Was that a silver Texas Special Stratocaster? And off we went, had a good chat. You're not going to lose your friends. Progressive Adventists, you're just often staying because you love Ellen too much. John says eternal revelation seminars. Oh my goodness, they go on and on. Dexter says, rumor has it that haystacks taste great with shredded chicken. Yeah, or beef, bolognese sauce. Get rid of the teachings of the SDA, E.G. White Millerite teachings. Miller told the flock he was wrong, but Ellen told the little flock I had a dream and it was a big lie. And you do see the end of the truth. Yeah, I mean, she has visions that say William Miller's dates were correct. There's so much evidence to show now that not. Yeah, Balaam's llama says, love lots about Advent and appreciate fellowship that isn't promoting dual covenant theology or Calvinism, but struggling with any affirming of Ellen G. White and last gen theology for sure. Totally. Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed chatting with you guys today. It feels like it's just been a real conversation. I'm always learning and expanding my thoughts and ideas and trying to get a grasp on it all. I've really enjoyed writing my book. It's going to be about the Civil War or the unknown Civil War within Adventism, the civil war they don't know they're having. And I'll be talking about Trojan horses and honey traps and all sorts of stuff. But it has been cathartic to write the book. I'm going to make it as cheap as possible, as cheap as Amazon will let me. And I hope you all buy a copy, and it will help me move to stage 2 of these 2 exciting projects I've been working on. One is the book. Finished all 18 chapters of it the other night. Now to proofread it, check Marion Davis and Fanny ChatGPT Bolton. I'm openly admitting it's a book by me using hundreds and hundreds of hours of my content, but I'm admitting I'm using ChatGPT to help me collate it all. But what a great resource. Like, I have used hundreds and hundreds of interviews as transcripts into a platform that then ChatGPT gets all the info. It's quite incredible. So I'm not claiming to be an academic. It's not going to be, a great book like this one. It's not going to be a great book like this one, or 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 that one, or this one. But I've used my limited abilities with new technology and literally hundreds of hours of my spoken word and written content. So I've enjoyed. I read it and I think, wow, that's me. How did ChatGPT know me so well? Okay, everybody, if there was something very much that you would like me to address, join the show tomorrow. Throw it in the comments. And thank you, Dr. Worm. Thanks, Peter. That's really helpful to hear exactly what you are hoping to achieve, see happen, to realise the SDA Church will never eradicate the LGT view. It won't eradicate it because it is LGT. Adventism is last generation theology in motion. Ellen White called a people together with visions, confirming pillars, and said, come on, guys, we're going to do this or Christ won't return. And we can hasten his return if we do. It is so clear. So clear. And that's not going to change. This is true. Listening ear adds, if you don't keep the Sabbath, you will not have Adventists as a friend. That's true. Yeah, they don't like that. I kind of ignore that. When they criticize me, I go, anyway, you want to catch up and have a coffee? And the progressives love having a coffee. Even though Ellen White said it's a sin. What about that quote I read? She said it's a sin to drink tea and coffee. A sin. I literally was at a local cafe a couple of Sabbaths ago having a very nice chicken schnitzel, and across the table from me was a Seventh-day Adventist progressive, just retired from SPD level division leadership, and he was drinking coffee or tea and maybe having a little bit of meat. That's a sin. Ellen White says that's a sin. And not only does she say it's a sin, I'll just might close with, not only is it a sin, she says, we may, and I quote, we may have to remain here in this world because of insubordination many more years. So if that person is watching, You're the one delaying the return. Thank you, Balaam. Appreciate your comment there, really do. So thank you all. We'll look forward to chatting tomorrow. Hang on. One last thing, because this is important. It's part of the flow. Dr. Worm disagrees there slightly. There are various views. Not all of Adventism is LGT. I think what I'm saying is the pillars of Adventism are LGT. Fundamental 24 is LGT. Ellen White's teachings are LGT. All the leaders that have tried to correct the course that might offer people various views are essentially saying you are being insubordinate. That is LGT. Pearson's last words there. Jesus provides a better way, I quote, the way of full submission and obedience to the will of our Heavenly Father. And the result of that, what is the result? An early entrance into his kingdom. That is LGT. So yeah, Adventists can have certainly a broad number of views and hold those views. Go for it. But those views are in direct insubordination to the mothership. You can have any kind of view you want until you speak up publicly and are employed and ordained. And Dr. Worm says it's more consistent to forget about Ellen if you want to be a prog-ad, in my opinion. And what happens when you forget about Ellen? The pillars collapse. See you, everybody. Don't forget, if you can throw a few dollars my way, it really, really helps. Just a couple of dollars. I've spent thousands in the last couple of weeks on these 2 new projects. Oh, my goodness. So, yeah, if you can, that'd be awesome. See you tomorrow, everybody. I'm looking forward to it. Take care and spot you in the pines.